All right, so I hope you grabbed your coffee because we all know how riveting Medicare is. My name is Carynne. I work for Noridian. We are the contractor that processes all of the claims for about 13 different states. My territories include Guam and California and Hawaii. This is a disclaimer slide. This CMS makes us put this in here all the time just to let you know that Medicare is always changing, so make sure you're keeping up to date. But everything that I'm telling you now is accurate as of today. Here's our agenda. As you know, telehealth for Medicare is very different than it is for most commercial insurances. There's restrictions on the place where the beneficiary can be, as well as the provider, and not to mention as well what services can actually be performed. So we're kind of going to talk about that if you're not too knowledgeable on all the information. So just an overview of what is telehealth. As you all know, it just permits that real-time communication. It gets getting rid of that actual face-to-face visit because you're doing it through a telecommunications system. The provider is at your distant site and the beneficiary is at your originating site. And we'll go over what those are as well. So it does substitute that in-person encounter. There are restrictions on this, as you all know, that not every service that you can bill as a face-to-face, you can bill for telehealth. CMS does have a list on their website of all of these codes. And then I also have some codes in here for you guys just to so you can kind of get a glimpse of the kinds of services that are used. We do strongly recommend that if you want a service or if you feel that a service would be beneficial to a beneficiary, then you need to go to CMS with your documentation and your clinical trials and all of your knowledge to let them know, hey, this service needs to be telehealth. The types of equipment, that guy went too fast. The types of equipment that can be used, CMS doesn't tell you which ones you can use, they just tell you which ones you can't use. And Skype is not a telehealth. You'd be surprised how many times providers will ask us that question. There isn't any guidelines out there from CMS that tell you exactly, and we can't tell you which communications device to use either. That's going to be up to you, just as long as it meets all the requirements. So talking about originating sites, that's where your beneficiary is going to be. So this is the one question that I always get from providers: can my beneficiary be at home? And the answer to that question is still no. It's not an applicable site for Medicare purposes. You have to be in a rural HPSA area or in a metropolitan statistical area. That's the only beneficiaries that are allowed to receive telehealth services. I can tell you in 2020 that is changing. That's the only information that I have. The only thing that they've told us is that the home is going to be an allowed place of service, but there's going to be restrictions. We just don't know what any of those are yet. So stay tuned. This is the HPSA. This is you can find out on this IRSA website. It's the HRSA, the data warehouse. You type in your zip code and it'll let you know if you're in a statistical area that is the population that needs the service, or if you're in a rural area. That's what those two ones will define. And this is the analyzer that'll tell you if your beneficiary is in a zip code that can have that type of service. These are the authorized originating sites that are allowed. This is where the beneficiary will go to see their provider via the telehealth. So these are the only facility sites that are allowed per Medicare guidelines as of today. Sites that are not allowed, which would be the beneficiary's home, which we discussed, independent renal dialysis facilities, and sites that are not within those models. There is an exception of a CJR model, which is a joint replacement, comprehensive joint replacement model. If you have further questions about that, I can definitely answer those for you. Facility fee, just straight across the board, it doesn't change per state. So you would bill $25.76 as the allowance for allowing the patient to come in and use your equipment. And then your distant site. This is where the provider that is providing all of this information, this is where they are located. It's got to be, you heard Morgan talk about, it all varies by state, and that's absolutely true when it comes to Medicare and what providers can actually do. It has to be within their scope of law and underneath, or scope of practice underneath state law. The location also must be on the enrollment file. So he can't be in his car, in a hotel room, things like that. There has to be an actual site that's listed on your enrollment application. Yeah, or a boat. We've had that question before as well. These are your eligible practitioners. These are the only providers that can provide telehealth services to patients. They're hoping to add some more to these, but as of right now, this is what we've got. Don't know if we have anybody here from Alaska or Hawaii, but there is an asynchronous, which is kind of a store and forward. They're testing it out now, so it's not a real-time communication with the patient. So if that's a state that you are in, I definitely have further information for you on that. New in 2018, the next 3 slides, I'm just going to kind of leave them up here for you guys for a second. These are the covered codes that you are allowed to be billed via telehealth for Medicare patients. This slide is pretty much your E&M services, all of your psychotherapy, things like that for this slide. The next one is going to be all of your behavioral health, your risk assessments, a lot of preventive services, which CMS is really trying to push for their patients. And then this next slide as well is more covered services that include more preventive care. There is a full list out on their website, and they do update them annually. GT modifier, it's required on all claims. They got rid of, it's not required. It was required as of last year, but that's when they added the place of service 02, which gives us to know that that's the distance site. And I think I talk about this on the next slide here. So no matter where you're located, your distant site, which is your provider, they're always going to use 02, and your originating site where your beneficiary is, that's going to be wherever place of service that you're at. So your office, outpatient, things like that.
Is the home office
okay? For the provider, yes, if it's on their enrollment application. Frequently asked questions that we get a lot, is there a number of originating site fees that can be billed per day, week, or month? And no, there's just one fee per eligible encounter. So as long as the service is provided, you can have more than the one. Second question that we get, when billing the originating site, would you list the distant site practitioner as the rendering provider? And that is correct. Talked about this one, we get this all the time still. Is Skype or even FaceTime a HIPAA compliant method? And CMS does not recognize the two of these services to be compliant. Fourth question, if a telehealth service was provided from a non-authorized site and the GY modifier, which tells us it's statutorily excluded, would it be denied as patient or provider responsibility? That would be a patient responsibility. You'd be giving them an ABN, they recognize that it's not going to be paid for by Medicare, and they're assuming responsibility. And then can the distant site provider be located at home during the telehealth visit? We just got this question, and the answer is yes, as long as it's on their enrollment application. And then the last couple slides that I have for you guys are some resources out on our website for Part A and for Part B. These are all for your jurisdiction E, so if you're a jurisdiction F, you would need a different site, but it's all on our website. And then also the IOM references for all the guidelines. CMS, on their website, they have a great telehealth page that includes all of the covered codes as well as all of the guidelines that we just kind of went over. And then this is probably the best resource for you to get any information for telehealth. It's a booklet that CMS puts out. This one was updated in February of this year, so it is the most current information. They will be updating it again when they add new codes and things like that, which will happen again in January. And then there is something that started this month. It is for bundled with ESRD. It's a new service, and there are limitations on this one, and this one can be performed in the patient's home, but it is a very limited scope. I do have a CR that came out on this one, so if you have any questions, or if you have patients, or if you do dialysis, or you have end-stage renal disease patients, definitely let me know and I can get you that specific information on that. And that's all I have for you guys. What do you have for me?
Thank you so much. That
course.
was awesome.
Any questions?
So in terms of, I'm a teleophthalmologist, so obviously equipment is very expensive. So would it be better for Noridian to cover, let's say, having the patient go to the emergency department, have all of the vital state and do the diagnostics? And I understand there's a code for technical and we do the professional type. So is that currently the thinking and what's coming?
So are you saying because like have the patient go into the ER instead of like and do their telehealth from there, or?
Extended services, we cover a broad region. So it's oftentimes not possible to have regional participants of our program accept patients rapidly.
Yeah, and it would just also depend on obviously the services that you're billing for, and then also what's the best for the patient is kind of how we would always suggest. Anybody else?
Any other?
I have a question. Is this just specific for Medicare straight, or how about the Advantage or the?
It's all going to be different.
They're all gonna-
Yeah, because you don't know if that company has decided to allow different services, but when it comes to just straight Medicare, these are the policies that CMS has put in place.
This is a question either for Milton or you. You had mentioned that to cover yourself, you should have the patient sign an ABN. You're doing this through a telehealth portal. Does VSee or the website have this digitally so they can do it there and then send it back to you? Because it's requiring that they have a fax machine or something, because they're not in your office, correct? So how have you seen it done? Or Milton, have you solved that problem and built it into the portal?
I was like, we usually
app.
don't. I don't see that side of it.
You're just the payer.
Exactly. Yeah. If you know that your patient is not going to qualify for that, then, I mean, obviously the home
The problem
is
is you don't know ahead of
the
time.
home's
That's
not
always
a place of service, so they're gonna have to come into an originating site. But if the
that place
service that's being rendered to them is a non-covered service, they're already going to be there, so you will have them sign the actual paper form.
So part of VSee, we also had a lot of these rich intake form, consent forms. You just build it into a part of your telemedicine in the intake process.
But how do they sign it, Milton? Because it has to have a signature. Oh, it's an e-signature. You
actually
agree?
try, you just typing the keyboard is actually sufficient. Or you could get fancy using those, like a e-sign. But
Thank
just
you for
type.
solving the problem.
If anyone has questions, how do we contact you?
Depends on what your question is. I can definitely give out my email. They caution us from doing so because a lot of the times I get individual questions from providers. Well, why did my claim deny? I can tell you, but CMS tells us that there's a scope that it has to go through, but I can definitely give out to my email address to those who have policy questions. I can answer those.
Thank you so much. By the way, yeah, for those that might not know, Noridian is like they're monstrous size. I'm not sure like how big they are. So again, so this is amazing resource to have you share insight. Thank you so much.